Eugene Mulero, Transport Topics. Joining us today is Ed Mortimer. He is Executive Director of Transportation Infrastructure at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and Executive Director of Americans for Transportation Mobility.
Great.
Thanks for being on the show.
Good to be with you, Eugene.
Thank you. Let's go into when you were before the Senate earlier this year and you had an exchange with the panel and you said that one thing that is required is political courage, and this is for raising the gas tax. And I want to just point that President Trump had some mention about the gas tax increase, some clarification from the press secretary, but still it was a moment in time where you had POTUS talking about it. What was your reaction to that? And take us into why we should look into the gas tax increase.
Sure. Well, we're very excited because President Trump has been, since the campaign, from his transition period into his administration, has been a longtime advocate for increased and modernizing America's infrastructure. And so yesterday was just a continuation of a discussion that's begun about how do we fund, finance, and make sure we have a 21st century infrastructure that can allow the American economy to grow. The president has laid out an ambitious agenda of having 3% economic growth during his administration, and infrastructure has to be the backbone of that type of economic growth. So again, the Chamber of Commerce has been talking about a variety of options that need to be on the table. We haven't looked at raising the federal gasoline and diesel taxes since 1993. Could you imagine selling a product or moving some freight at 1993 cost?
Exactly.
And that's kind of what we've been doing at the federal level.
Yep.
And so we are falling behind. And we have assets like the interstate highway system that were built in the 50s and 60s, and now they've reached their useful conclusion. And so we don't just have to fill the potholes, we have to figure out how do we modernize and make an infrastructure 21st century, knowing that autonomous vehicles are coming online, and bringing the latest safety features to make sure that we have an infrastructure that really allows our economy to grow. Other parts of the world are doing this, we're behind. And now we have a once-in-a-generational opportunity to address these issues, and the Chamber wants to work with the administration and Congress to get this done this year.
There was some optimistic and positive reaction on Capitol Hill. You had the chairman of the Transportation Committee saying that he reminded reporters that he's been open to all options for funding infrastructure. Right. Then we saw Senator Tom Carper of Delaware who put out a statement saying, hey, I've been calling for this for years. Right. But you noted before the Senate that there's an impediment. This is the pledge that some Republicans take about not raising taxes. Right. How quickly do you think Grover Norquist, who manages that pledge, perhaps contacted either the administration or members of Congress?
Right. Well, I don't know when Grover Norquist contacted people. What I do know is that one, you have to look at these issues in their totality.
Yeah.
Okay. We have to invest in America's infrastructure. Okay. The way that we have done it has been the most transparent, open way that people that use the system pay for the system. You mentioned Grover Norquist. Well, in Tennessee, they just raised their gasoline tax by 10 cents. And Grover Norquist basically stepped in and said, look, as long as there's offsetting tax reductions in other parts of the government, that gas tax could be part of the solution. So again, I think you need to look at taxation in its totality, and the Chamber of Commerce has been a longtime supporter of tax reform. And so if we can overall reform America's tax code while adjusting things like the federal gasoline tax to meet those infrastructure needs, we view that's a win-win for the economy.
We saw Tennessee, also Indiana raising the gas tax. And this is a pattern that we're noticing now. Last year was New Jersey. We've seen Kentucky, New Hampshire. Right. What is the reaction to the states that are doing it for themselves?
Well, Eugene, it's interesting. Some people inside the Beltway think that if you support a gas tax increase that you're going to lose your seat. Well, the American Road and Transportation Builders yesterday put out a study saying that not one member of the state legislature in any of those states that you mentioned has lost a seat because of supporting increased investment in infrastructure. So that argument has really been thrown out the door. I mentioned in my testimony, it takes intestinal courage. What we're doing from the business community's perspective is we're making the case, we're laying out some solutions, and then we're going to support elected leaders to make tough decisions. It's not easy to raise revenue. We need to make sure that we're investing in the right projects, the ones that make the most economic sense. Two, we need to make sure that we're looking at funding and financing. We believe there needs to be more private financing in infrastructure, but it is not a replacement for increasing core federal funding. And then we need to modernize procurement practices and making sure that we're utilizing limited revenues in a more effective way. On the surface transportation side with highways and transit at the federal level, we've done a good job of streamlining the regulatory process. There's still more work to be done, but if you put all those things together and you can provide taxpayers a clear picture of how to modernize America's infrastructure, we are willing to stand with those elected officials to make those tough decisions, to make sure we make the investments necessary so our economy can grow.
You know, at the federal level, just on that point, I had in conversations with members, especially of the T&I committee, the Transportation Committee, I bring that up. That you say the chamber will be there, with them on the gas tax, and I had a very senior lawmaker tell me that that's all nice and good, but when my opponent comes in and I have a vote on record saying I increase the gas tax, I will be attacked by that opponent either in a primary. Right. How do you respond to that?
Well, I respond to it. We elect officials to be leaders in our government, and we elect them to make tough decisions. No one said these are easy. We can't control how people respond to different things. What we can control is there's a logical progression. You have to make an investment, okay, just like you invest in your home. Okay, sometimes the roof gets a leak in it. That's not an investment a lot of people want to make. It's one you have to make.
Correct.
And that's where we're at with America's infrastructure. We just got, the American Society of Civil Engineers just said our infrastructure is a D+. Many parts of the country, it's actually worse than that.
Yeah.
And so this isn't about, am I worried about my elected seat? It's about doing the right thing. When Dwight Eisenhower developed the plan for the interstate highway system, he didn't do it because it was going to get him reelected. He did it was the right thing for America. And so we need to support elected officials to get that kind of mindset. And not about their next election, but what's the right thing to do while they're serving the American people.
Speaking of infrastructure funding, we're getting some signals from the administration, the Treasury Secretary, Transportation Secretary, and the President himself that we should expect to see a long-term infrastructure funding plan soon.
Right.
That could mean in a few weeks. I had heard early summer, like in June. A, what are you hearing on timing-wise? And B, how do you think, what should be in this plan?
Sure. Well, exact timing, we don't know. What we can tell you is that we've had several conversations with administration officials, with the Congress, and a lot of work's being done on it. We are very optimistic that something's going to happen in the near future, at least an outline of a plan. It may come out in several phases. It may not be just one big package, but several phase outline.
Okay.
We also believe that what the package should include is long-term investment. So the President's laid out $1 trillion in 10 years. The $1 trillion, while important, we believe the 10 years is equally as important. And what does that mean? Well, if state DOTs know that they have 10 years of predictable funding from their federal partner, then they can make decisions, and the private sector can come in and make decisions based on the predictability of funding. This is a partnership. There is no one entity that pays for all of our infrastructure. The federal government plays a lead role, but it's supported by the states, the local governments, and sometimes the private sector. Everyone has to come to the table. We talked earlier about these states. They've been stepping up in lack of the federal government doing it. But when they step up and they raise their funding, they're not doing it in a vacuum. They understand that they expect the federal government to match their increases as well. So they're not doing it in spite of the government. They're doing it because they're hoping the federal government does its part. And so, look, we think we have a once-in-a-generational opportunity to address these issues long-term. This isn't just about the next transportation bill. This is about long-term investment in America's infrastructure. And so we think the timing is right. We think we've done a great job of articulating why it's important. Now we got to get to the tough way. How do we do it? And again, we laid out, you asked me what should be in the package. We want to make investments in projects that make the most economic sense. The American Trucking Association's foundation put out a study looking at about 100 bottlenecks around the country. Let's focus investment on those, and we could break up those bottlenecks. I think it was about 80% of the freight is involved in one of those bottlenecks.
Oh, yeah.
So if we could address those issues, then we can talk about the rest of the infrastructure. But let's solve the problems that are solvable. We have a $2.5 trillion infrastructure deficit, according to American Society of Civil Engineers. We're not going to solve that with one piece of legislation or one funding source. But if we can address some of these issues in a systemic, long-term way, That's how you grow your economy. It's not just throwing money at a problem. It's actually having a long-term strategic plan and making investments in projects that make the most economic sense, using economic data just like many businesses around the country when they make investment decisions. That's how they do it. And so we'd like to have the federal government take a lead role in that and using data-driven decision-making and not necessarily about where a member of Congress sits or a member of the state legislature sits, but where those economic decisions make the most sense.
I hear you on the once-in-a-generation opportunity on infrastructure,
Mm-hmm.
but you and I, when we talk to the transportation players on Capitol Hill,
Mm-hmm.
they tell us, hey, we like infrastructure, there's bipartisan agreement,
Yep.
but we're also working on healthcare,
Yep.
tax reform, fiscal 2018 budget.
Mm-hmm.
So how does one navigate these waters when you have these epic traffic jams on Capitol Hill?
Good question, Eugene. Well, we can't control a lot of that. What we can do is articulate the need, articulate why this needs to get done now, and talk about the economic growth that can occur if we modernize our infrastructure. Again, the president has reiterated, really you're looking at three big issues from the administration this year. They've talked healthcare, tax reform, and infrastructure. Those three can all be interrelated. At the end of the day, I don't know what order all of them are going to go. All I know is what we're doing from the business community's perspective is making the case for infrastructure investment this year. So we're pushing, we're talking to as many people as we can. We're encouraging businesses around the country to talk to their elected officials and tell them the time is now, that these investments have to be made, and the longer we wait, the more it's going to cost all taxpayers to pay for it, because it costs more money. The longer you delay, the longer it takes to fix, and it's going to cost us more money. So it's time to stop the delay, stop putting the problem off, and dealing with it head on.
That brings me to a terrific way of letting the public know of the need for infrastructure is Infrastructure Week, and that's something the Chamber has been a part of since the beginning of this movement. This year it launches May 15th. I believe the Chamber will be the host event.
That is correct.
Can you give us a preview of what to expect at the launch, and what does Infrastructure Week should mean for the country?
Sure, Eugene. Well, about 5 years ago, the Chamber of Commerce joined other business groups and the AFL-CIO to create something that we called Infrastructure Week. And the thought was we have to have a national discussion 1 week every year about why infrastructure investment is important and solutions to the problem. As you mentioned, this is our 5th year, and the event is starting May 15th at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. We are going to have over 300 people in the room, with a variety of CEOs in the transportation sphere, as well as elected officials. Secretary Elaine Chao of DOT is going to be there, and we're going to have everyone come into a room and talk about the needs are there. Now, how do we take our needs and take it into action? And then after that, throughout the week, there's going to be over 150 events all over the United States, at ports, at railroad terminals, at airports, talking about the needs of infrastructure. And many of those events, state and local chambers of commerce are going to be at. For more information on this, you can go to infrastructureweek.org. There's a calendar with a list of events all over the country. We have about 22 of those events here in Washington, but it's not just a Washington discussion. This is really about the country coming together to talk about why infrastructure needs are important and bringing all the stakeholders in a room and saying the time is now to do the action. And obviously, we were talking earlier, timing on when we might get an administration infrastructure package. We're keeping our fingers crossed. Infrastructure Week would be a great time to get more details about it. But again, the administration is going to be part of this discussion, bringing Congress in, elected officials around the country. This is the time to do it. And so we think the week of May 15th or 22nd, there's going to be a wonderful discussion around the country about the needs, and now we got to get to making solutions that are actually going to address and modernize the infrastructure.
Ed, thank you for making time to come on our Newsmakers program. And we always follow the work that the Chamber does on transportation and infrastructure. And check out ttnews.com on Tuesdays for Capital Agenda. Thank you.
Thank you.